I wanted to say welcome to all of you, bienvenidos a todos, who are joining us today, both online and in person. I want to thank you for joining us for this special symposium today, which actually has two aims. The first aim is to celebrate the publication of Diálogo Volume 24, Issue Number 2, whose special theme is Building Latinx Studies, Case Samples from the Midwest. We are very lucky to have the special guest editor of the issue, Lucía Suárez of Iowa State University with us today, as well as some of the fantastic contributors to this issue, Sylvia Martínez of Indiana University, Francis Aparicio of Emeritus now, I guess, at Northwestern University, and Jose Cuello at Wayne State University. So welcome to these contributors. Our second, I don't know if I've said this explicitly, our second reason for having this event today is because the entire year we've been celebrating the 25th anniversary of the existence of Diálogo. Diálogo began publication in 1996. If you do the math, we're a little bit late celebrating our 25th anniversary, but in part that was due to a delay that was during the pandemic. But now we're actually completing our and beginning the publication of our 25th issue. So it is in fact the 25th anniversary of the existence of the journal. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the huge debt that we owe to Professor Félix Masud Piloto, our colleague here at DePaul who recently passed away. As you may know, Dr. Masud Piloto was a professor in the Department of History here, and he directed the Center for Latino Research for 17 years, from 1992 to 2009. Felix founded or helped to found many of the programs that remain signature features of DePaul's Center for Latino Research today, such as Diálogo. In addition to the faculty fellowship program that we have here for faculty, and also an annual event called Poesía en Abril, which is a poetry festival that brings poets from Spain and throughout Latin America and from the United States as well, here to Chicago. And I believe that they celebrated their 14th anniversary this year. It's an immensely successful event that ties DePaul to the community. And these were all things that kind of began as programs under the directorship of Félix Masud Piloto. So we miss him, and we're forever grateful for his leadership. And I just wonder if we could take just a moment of silence to remember Felix. Thank you. Finally, I just want to say thank you to the folks who've worked to make this event possible today. I want to say a very special thank you to Marcela Reales Bisbal, our new assistant director here at the Center for Latino Research. Also, Sara Luz Torres, our department assistant, and the Diálogo editorial committee, one of whom is here with us, Professor Carolina Sternberg. I also want to mention Rocio Ferreira, Delia Cosentino, and Juan Mora Torres, the rest of our editorial team. And thanks to other folks who've come today. I'm now going to pass it over to Professor Lucía Suárez, so let me introduce her. Lucía Suárez is an associate professor of Spanish and Latinx Studies and director of the U.S. Latino Studies program at Iowa State University. She's the author of The Tears of Hispaniola, Haitian and Dominican Diaspora Memory, and the co-editor of The Portable Island, Cubans at Home in the World with Ruth Bejar, and of Dancing Bahia, Essays on Afro-Bahian Dance, Education, Memory, and Race, an international collaboration with Amelia Conrado and Yvonne Daniel, which received the special citation for the 2019 Dance Studies Association de la Torre Bueno Award. She's contributed to numerous collections, including the Cambridge Companion to Latino and Latina Literature, edited by John Moran Gonzalez. Without further ado.
Gracias, Bill. So I am going to first say hello to everyone, and this is going to be an odd situation because I'm looking up to the people who are here. But when I do that, I'm not looking into the screen to the people who are on the screen. So I'm going to do a little bit of both and try not to get confused.
I will look there.
You want to do that? Okay, but like you are here live, so it's weird. So anyway, so technology is a little bit bizarre, but first things first is, I too want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you to Bill Johnson Gonzalez, the editor-in-chief of Diálogo, because from the very beginning he was, yes, we can do this, let's do it, and it's been a lot of time, a lot of talking, a lot of versions, and it's been wonderful. Thank you to the Center for Latino Research for inviting me and having me here. Thank you to DePaul University for having the Center for Latino Research here. Thank you to Marcela Reales Bisbal, to Stacy Saley and the editors at the University of Texas Press. I hope, Stacy, you're still there. You are. Hi. And special thank you to all the contributors that have made this issue possible. Without contributors, we have no issue. So special thank you there. I want to give you a little bit of a background of how this issue came about. I mean, I didn't just, wake up one morning and say, Billy, let's do this, I came to Iowa State University in 2017 as the Latino Studies Program Director. And one of the things that I found when I was doing the calculations is, oh my goodness, 25 years, and this is in 2019. So I thought that's the first thing that we have to do. We have to come and make a splash, or at least that's the intention, or was the intention. And I set up a U.S. Latino Studies Program 25-year anniversary symposium. It started at 8 a.m. and did not end until 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. So it was 12 hours and some. It was long. It was, I thought, fantastic. And you can all find it. It's online. And the themes were commitment, connection, and inclusion. One of the things that so that's your link. One of the things that I wanted to find out in the process of putting together this 25-year anniversary symposium was, well, what is the history of this program that I have inherited, that I'm so gung-ho to be part of and to take to the next 25 years. I don't think I'll be around for the full 25 years for the next phase. And one of the things that I found completely mind-boggling was that people didn't really have much to say, or some people had some things to say, some people were angry, other people were dismissive. It was very confusing. And then I went into the archives and suddenly I realized there is no real archived history. And I wondered if that was the case in other Latino institutions. And I thought, well, let me start. And I invited 4 local Latino Studies Program Department directors. And amongst them at that time, there was Bill Johnson Gonzalez, Larry Fountain Stokes, Sylvia Martínez, and Daryl Wanzer Serrano, who in parentheses has since gone down to Texas. So he's no longer part of our Midwestern consortium. But lately I'm starting to feel like Texas is part of the Midwestern consortium for many reasons. Anyway, and when they presented, I was taken by the similarities and the dissimilarities. And then I was impacted by the fact that really there is a missing documentation. And so I started to think about it. And I'm just going to go through this. There's one missing piece here. But anyway, so I invited the original directors. And then I thought, no, we need more. And so the more is Diálogo. And it has 7 different essays. Let me see if I can I enlarge it? Yeah, I can enlarge it, right? So each article. So there's a shared community, Chicano Studies at the University of Minnesota by Dionisio Valdez. And a major point that he makes is that it's not a program, that it is a department. And the departments have faculty tenure lines, and they have greater weight in the politics or in the administration. So that was really important. There's a struggle to fully institutionalize Latinx studies, the Detroit Latinx community, academic activists, and Wayne State University. And that's Jose Cuello, who is with us today. So I won't take away from his thunder. Latina studies at the University of Michigan, Negotiating Inclusion and Exclusion in the Midwest by Larry LaFountain Stokes. And U.S. Latino Studies, Diversity and the Work of Transformation, which I put together, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that myself, Ideas, Interests, and Institutions, the Institute for Latino Studies at Notre Dame by Luis Ricardo Fraga. One of the things that came up, lots comes up, all of these articles are really well researched. They're really excellent institutional documentation, directors' memories. One of the things that comes up from them as being an institute is how well they are funded, right? So that starts, putting in bas relief a lot of the differences as well as the similarities between our programs, departments, and institutes. Then 20 years of Latino studies at Indiana University, from student protest to celebration of Latinx cultures, by Sylvia Martínez, who was in our original panel and is with us today. And Latinx studies in the Midwest, an illegitimate field, by Frances R. Aparicio, who is also with us today, I knew her at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and then was at University of Illinois in Chicago, and then Northwestern. So she was able to kind of give us a very rounded history of Latino studies in the Midwest. Finally, some people were unable, people are busy, so to put together an article, and I wanted more voices, and so we got some interviews with Eden Torres and Karen Mary Davalos at the University of Minnesota, from Jorge Luis Chinea, who is the present director of Center for Latino Studies and Latin American Studies at Wayne State, and Cristina Abreu and Michael Gonzalez, the present and previous long-standing directors of the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies at Northern Illinois University. One of the things that, I'm gonna speak for probably another 4 minutes before I pass it on, because I know time is always of essence, is that what I wanted to do was get stories, get histories, find out how our communities are involved, find out about the activism, about the political movements, about the students, the community. And so what I find as I was researching is that, in fact, this is the first collection intentionally to document institutional memory for Latina OX studies and their founding constituents in the Midwest, and to record the different and shared experiences contingent on this kind of programming. And here's the key. And it wasn't as much of a key, I guess it was, but I feel like it's even more of a key right now in our present political moment, is that these experiences confirm that Latina OX studies are a vital place in the constellation of higher education for the future. Thus, this special issue makes the case for continued and robustly supported Latina OX studies, and serves as a reference point from which related conversations among administrators, scholars, and activists should, I hope, ensue. This collection is by no means exhaustive, so I hope that is only the beginning of archival documentation. So in the intro, I talk about institutional memory, community collaborations, political activism, the working classes in the ivory tower, and how they shift education, create spaces of memory, inclusion and recognition of vast components of Latina OX communities and histories. Latina O studies are dynamic, and they're an always evolving field. That came out in all of the essays and all of the conversations that this particular special issue harbors. So short is that the work of directors, colleagues, and students and staff merit attention and merit to be documented historically, and I'm glad that we're starting here. I will quickly talk about the U.S. Latino Studies at Iowa State University. The 4 main points for me: that it has a dynamic history of Latinos collaborating across campus and communities, creating spaces of valuation and historical memory, and the Latino Studies program works incessantly on centering programs that connect our Latino students, our Latino communities, and our non-Latino allies, and just to teach and just to communicate broadly, which is really important. And we have film series, invited speakers, lots of community engagement, outreach, and internships. So the program has been changed. I shifted the mission to have it be more active and interactive and socially engaged. So that's sort of the short of it. I do talk about the work of diversity and how difficult it is. And this was really, because it was published just now, but it was put together a while ago. And I'm a little bit sad to see how important and vital what we put out in these pages really are right now in the midst of dramatic budget cuts. So without further ado, I want to welcome our guest speakers. And we've got pictures and we've got them on the video with us. So Francis Aparicio, Emerita from Northwestern University. I'm passing the conversation over to you. Welcome and thank you.
Oh, so I'm the first one?
Yeah, I just followed the picture.
That's great.
I followed the
wonderful.
picture.
Yeah, no, that's great. So yeah, with Aparicio, I'm always the first. Okay, so again, I want to first begin to thank Billy Johnson for editing Diálogo and Lucía for this amazing opportunity, like you said, to document and create an archive, right, about Latino studies programs in the Midwest. I think I'm old enough to remember the Midwest Consortium for Latino Studies, maybe Jose does too, yeah. And a couple other institutional spaces, right, that have been part of the Midwest. But I have to say that I don't think we have seen this kind of documentation, and the chapters have been amazingly detailed and incredibly important now for us to be able to have that kind of archival evidence of our presence, right, and our struggles. So in my essay, what I tried to do is since I had just retired, it was important for me to kind of gather my personal memories of these multiple struggles against the unjust structures in which Latinx studies has been located right across so many campuses. The description of Latinx studies as an illegitimate field resonates with the numerous examples that populate this volume, right, regarding the need for legitimacy and validation that we have all worked so hard for, and that still remains, I think, an unattained goal. From Larry LaFontaine's mention, when I read the Michigan chapter, I was like, oh my God, things haven't changed much. He mentions the Michigan dean who refused to welcome any Latino studies director to his office. And I was like, that was the 1990s when I was there. So some of these attitudes and these dismissals of the field itself and of those who embody the field, have not changed much. And then the numerous claims regarding the lack of funding and support on the part of higher administration for our units, for our students, for our curriculum. It's a somber reality, I think, the neglect and the abandonment of our field of study in higher education. This, I think, is very painfully highlighted throughout the volume. So in my piece, I did talk about Michigan. I talked about UIC, Northwestern, and they're very different universities in many ways. Some have fabulous resources. Others, we went through budget cuts every couple of years. But all of these programs, one way or another, needed to survive. And not only that, we wanted to work towards a sense of thriving, right? Like, when do we sit down and say, okay, we have, covered our needs, our basic needs. Now let's move on to some extra stuff, right? So what else do we do from where we are? But I have to say that I think the question that comes up throughout this volume too, and in my essay, is like, how can we think about a unit thriving when so much of the basic requirements and needs have not been met yet? So the dismissal on the part of administration, right, stands in stark contrast. And I think we have now witness nationwide a significant growth of Latinx students in higher education. 20% of college students are Latinx. The visible growth of books being published, articles being written, and here I give a nod to Lourdes Torres, who I know is here, and her editorial work and leadership in the Latinx Studies Journal, which also celebrates 20 years this year. So again, these are major important institutional sites and interventions that are making the field larger and more legitimate. But what does it mean then for Latino studies units to be so minimally developed and under-resourced, right? Almost ghost units, when the scholarly work has been so incredibly rich and has increased also in terms of numbers. I want to add that my arguments about the illegitimacy of Latino studies programs and departments in the Midwest are also common in the East and West Coast, I was talking to a colleague at NYU, and she says they only have 2.5 faculty members teaching Latino studies courses, even though there's other professors, but who are only focused on Latino studies. The public universities in both East and West Coast actually have been able to develop major departments. I'm thinking of CUNY and UCLA, right, since the 60s and the 70s, and they have been able to be more full departments. But so for me, it was kind of interesting to think about what is so exceptional or unique about the Midwest and our Latinx studies programs in the Midwest. Because I think the definition of our region as a non-place, right? The way in which it's considered a no man's land, it's not the West Coast, it's not the East Coast. There was never any kind of activism here, which we know that's not true. But these kinds of perceptions, mainstream narratives about the Midwest, right, actually do impact the way that administration and higher education does or does not take us seriously, right? And the whole idea, the narrative of, Latinos as foreign newcomers, we've been here for centuries and decades, but we have not been, we're still considered newcomers to the region. So there's a lot of misconceptions about Latinos in the Midwest that do not help, right? The legitimation of our programs. But I think now that I'm president of the Latino Studies Association, which I have to say it's been a nightmare because it's all technology and I don't know nothing about technology, but anyway, I'll do my best. But looking at the national patterns suggests that being underfunded, being a small unit, minimal 100% faculty lines, all these things that make us barely survive is a national pattern. It's not just unique to the Midwest. So there goes my claim in my own essay about the importance of the region. Anyway, I think that's still something that we need to continue thinking about and grappling with. What makes us so unique or so different from the other regions? But what I wanted to do basically is just list a couple of things that to me were really commonalities among all the different chapters in the volume. I think despite the long journeys, I mean, you have Minnesota and Wayne State that are celebrating 50 years of existence, and that is amazingly important, right? But on the other hand, you have other places where Latino studies programs are barely, even beginning to emerge, even at Northwestern, which was still a very late beginning for Latino studies there. But there were some things that were amazingly important to me. First of all, I think the community and the student mobilizations that are what create these units, right? That they're grassroots movements that come from below, that come from the communities or from the undergrad students. I think Notre Dame, Lucía mentioned, is an example of an exception to this because it came from higher administration. They get a lot of funding. They have a whole research center there. But of course, there, the Catholic connection to Latino communities, right, has its own agenda. And I think those things explain this special interest in Latinos in this way. Iowa State too, Lucía, you mentioned in your article that was also, a higher administrator who decided to create Latino studies there. So all of these campuses, however, were all mobilized by students and our community activism, right? And community is a very important element of our curriculum, but not only of our curriculum and our histories, our genealogies, but also in terms of our epistemology, because we think about community in terms of these are the sources of knowledge for us. These are the people who are theorizing without theorizing, right? This is where we get our data and our facts and our qualitative narratives, etc. But it is important to recognize that too, that it's not community just created us and now we can do whatever we want, but that we really have to continue honoring and acknowledging the importance of community in our work. The second element that I think it's really important to remember is the systematic underfunding of the scholars, of the program directors, of the Latino studies itself as a field. I have to say that as a result of this underfunding, what I have found amazing is the creative ways in which all directors and leaders in these programs have come up with other alternative ways of funding things, right? So you go to student organizations or you get pockets of funding here or there, you do co-sponsored events. all kinds of things, creative ways of making things happen in these programs, despite the lack of funding. I want to bring up the recent and the more current nature of the way in which we're getting funded by the Mellon Foundation, which has been funding a good number of initiatives, and in some cases, even faculty hires and programs like at Northwestern. At Northwestern, we got a Mellon grant of a very big one for Latino studies and Asian American studies. And I have to say that that Mellon grant was funded, and it was written and proposed, and without us knowing about it. So the director of Asian American Studies and myself had no idea that the Dean's College was asking for this Mellon grant for us, without even asking us anything about our program. So I think that really speaks also to that kind of dismissal of who we are. I also want to bring up but what happens with the Mellon too is like, what will, this Mellon Foundation is here. At Northwestern, the programs have used the money already in the last 5 years. And now the deans are saying, we're not going to give you any more money, And so what happens when the money dries up? These are very contingent external funding, and it makes the universities less accountable to funding us in a much more permanent and respectful way. The third point that I want to bring up, which I brought up a lot in my essay, is the lack of full-time faculty lines. And I will do anything I can in Latino Studies Association to continue to educate administrators about that. I think this is utterly devastating because the field continues to produce scholars, but these scholars are all mostly in departments and in traditional disciplines. And it is not a way of dismissing those scholars, but it is also a way of saying that the hierarchies among these disciplines create these joint appointments, but then we can never do many decisions autonomously in terms of what kind of scholars we need, who is the best candidate for a field, because a lot of these hires are being vetted by departments. And I think that's still in many ways part of the reality of these hierarchies. The fact, if you start looking at Northern Illinois, mentioned that they have one full-time faculty line and 27 faculty associates in their unit, right? The same with Michigan State. You get 1 or 2 bodies, and then the rest are faculty associates or affiliates or joint appointments. What does this mean then for the autonomy and the legitimacy of a field of study that everybody claims, but there is no funding for full-time faculty to embody, right? So these are really ghost programs, and I will continue to insist on this, that we need to change in each of our campuses. We need to begin to advocate for changing these kinds of lack of faculty lines. We need more bodies in the programs themselves. And that lack of full-time faculty also leads to, not too many programs offer a major. If you're lucky enough, you offer a minor or a certificate. And that's not good enough. I mean, where 20% of the college student body is Latino, we need to start making more formal majors. More programs actually create majors and offer majors that makes us the field worthy of serious study and academic rigor. Madison, Wisconsin-Madison just announced a new major in Chicano and Latino studies, and that is a cause for celebration. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that in terms of the lack of majors, one of the important things that are happening right now is the departmentalization campaigns that are being waged in a number of campuses among undergrad students in particular, who are trying to push and advocate for the transformation from programs to departments. And that being a department status gives us a lot more legitimacy and more power, and perhaps a little bit more resources in terms of what we have. UIC, I just found out Jonathan Inda just turning the paperwork for UIC to become a department. And these are the kinds of movements we want to become. We want to see more of this happening throughout the Midwest, but also across the nation. And while it is true that, traditional departments, we all have different, different relationships with traditional departments and disciplines. That varies from campus to campus, from individual to individuals. It is important to remember that our Latino studies curriculum is defined mostly then by what joint appointments can or cannot teach. And I'm sure, Lucia, you have had experience in that already, where you want to bring people to teach for you, and they're too busy with what they're already teaching for their departments. And what we should be doing is saying, we have learning objectives for our majors, and these are the learning objectives that we need to offer our majors. These are the courses we need for our students, and the deans have to begin to respond to those needs, right? If not, we're not preparing our students then as majors. So in that sense too, Latino studies really should not belong to any one department or not. I know in Ohio State, the Spanish department was the one that embraced Latino studies and started it as a program within the Spanish department, and that didn't work because at the end there were historians and anthropologists and English department scholars who were feeling very excluded from that particular model, right, for Latino studies. Not one department, not any one department should own Latino studies. Latino studies should be able to overlap with all kinds of, fields, from public health to anthropology, from Spanish and English to performance studies, visual arts, whatever is the, whatever the faculty there in that particular campus can bring together. So I just want to finish with that. I want to say that these are common challenges and struggles that I have seen in my 40 years in the field. And I think at this point, we need to continue demanding equal representation on our campuses. I conclude my essay with a call for continuing the historical legacy of activism by speaking out and demanding a sustainable field for future generations. And while we have much work ahead of us, I also agree that we need to celebrate, right, our academic and pedagogical contributions, our legacies, embodied, for example, in all of the alumni that we have not perhaps tracked and kept in touch with, who have moved on to become journalists, they're teachers, activists, medical doctors, authors, and even some of them have become professors like us. So despite the lack of support, I think collectively we have and are creating alternative society in which critical Latinidad truly matters. But I do want to say that I think given the specific moment that we're living now with all the banning of books and the closing of, laws in Texas and Florida and North Carolina, and it's spreading like wildfire, I think we need to be also very outspoken about what we have done and how important this field is for the generation of future generations of students and citizens in this country. So thank you.
Lucia, do you want to introduce the next guest?
I've lost my PowerPoint. So our next guest on the list is Sylvia Martínez, who was one of the initial speakers at the 25-year anniversary at Iowa State and is part of our collection. And I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I remember that the introduction of your article, which was what you introduced also in the conference, was very powerful. So I hope that you start with that at this moment also. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucia, and thanks, Bill, for having me be part of this lovely issue. I wasn't going to start with that, but let me go ahead and start with that. I started the issue and my presentation at Iowa State Celebration with a picture of Dolores Huerta and the visit she made to our campus in September of 2019. And it was, for me, besides getting tenure, like the best professional experience thus far. It's been the best professional experience thus far, and achievement. And I really used it as an example of what Latino studies at IU can do. Bring amazing speakers, activists, right, artists to campus with a really modest budget. So speaking to the budgetary constraints, and it was a lovely event. I worked with Lillian Casillas, the director of the Latino Cultural Center, to bring Dolores Huerta, and we were worried people wouldn't come. Like we debated on the venue and worried we had reserved a venue that was too large, and it ended up being standing room only. We had to turn people away because we reached capacity. So it was just an amazing event. But what I wanted to share today was a little bit about the history of our program and touch upon some of the accomplishments of previous directors and my own experience as director between 2015 and 2019, and then speak to some of the challenges and opportunities which Francis has already mentioned. In terms of the history, well, the piece says we're celebrating 20 years, but we're getting close to our 25th anniversary. Latino Studies at Indiana University was founded in 1999, but it turns out that requests for the program really started in the 1970s through student protests. I mean, that's usually the case. And it started really with an unfortunate incident on campus. So an associate instructor in the Spanish department called two Latinx students a derogatory term to reference their darker skin in comparison to his lighter skin. And those two students, undergraduates, submitted a formal grievance to the department. And generally there seemed to be a lot of tension at the time between what is considered formal or correct Spanish, right? And then the Spanish spoken by US-born Latinx students at the time. So I think that's what seems to have contributed to the racist remark in class. What resulted from the grievance was the development of a Spanish course for the US-born Latino, which was taught by Professor Luis Davila. And he was a beloved member of the community. A lot of Latinx students speak highly of him and creating a really strong sense of community on campus. In fact, Lillian Casillas has very fond memories of him. And Professor Luis Davila then subsequently developed a program called Chicano-Riqueño Studies, again, to capture the experience of the US Latino. So he was known for offering a lot of those types of classes in the Spanish department. And it turns out between the 1970s and 80s, we saw the creation of some services and offices to aimed at catering to the needs of a growing Latinx population on campus. So an Office of Latino Affairs was created, and that office was supposed to help with the recruitment and retainment of Latinx students. But there's still no Latino Studies program, just sort of development of courses at the time. In 1973, we also saw the creation of La Casa, our Latino Cultural Center, on campus, again, as a way to help Latinx students feel like they belonged on the IU Bloomington campus. And it wasn't until a major student protest in 1997, which apparently students sat in the provost's office, they took over some administrator's office, which resulted in the creation of several services for students on campus. A Latino Studies program for one, the recognition of Martin Luther King Day as a holiday on campus, the development of an Asian American Culture Center, and then also the development of some LGBTQ plus student services. So again, really took student protest, mobilization for administration to respond, which is, I think, a common story of many programs. And so the administration responded with an external search for a director, and they hired Jorge Chapa, a sociologist. And so he is known as the founding director of Latino Studies at IU Bloomington. He hired me in March, April of 2006, and then left that summer for Urbana-Champaign. And so I joined John Nieto Phillips, a historian in Bloomington. I think it was just the two of us at the time as half-time, right? Faculty members in the program. So that's a little bit of the history. I wanted to touch upon some of the accomplishments of past directors and again, speak to the challenges and opportunities. So when I started as first year faculty member, Arlene Diaz from history had taken over directing the program. And I think one of the greatest achievements during her directorship, she really took teaching as a priority. It was a priority for her, and she had a lot of experience working with the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. And so she gathered all of us, faculty, graduate students teaching for us in a faculty learning community to develop learning outcomes and to learn how to assess those learning objectives in our curriculum, which was brilliant foreshadowing, because when I took over as director in 2015, the university started requesting all departments and units to create learning outcomes, objectives, right? Assessment, right? To create assessment of our programs and majors and minors. So we had that ready. So it was made my time a lot easier when I took over. Arlene also had developed a major marketing campaign on campus where which helped grow our number of minors. She tagged it Latino Studies, the best minor for every major, right? So understanding that as the Latinx population in the US grows and right continues to grow, regardless of your specialty, your field, right? Law, medicine, education, right? You're going to need some minimal level of cultural competency, right? To meet the needs of this population. So we had lovely posters on buses and all over campus, the best minor for every major. Then we had John Nieto Phillips take over as the director, also a historian. And I would say he loves the arts. And he developed a lot of the programming for which we are known for today. The film festival, so he started a film festival. I want to say maybe the first one was in 2012. So we're known for our film festival, for our Latinx Heritage Month event, where we try to bring in a big name speaker. So that's why the title, right? Student Protest to Celebration of Latinx Cultures, because it really is through John's work that we're known for these types of events. I do want to point out that during John's tenure, we were pushing for faculty lines, like we need a faculty line. And the administration told him, well, show us butts and seats, right? Show us enrollment patterns. And John worked really hard collaborating with departments like Spanish, because what we found is students were interested in learning the language. So again, we sold Latinx studies as learn about the culture. And so we got a lot of Spanish students to minor in Latino studies. So we showed the butts and seats, we showed increased enrollments, no response from administration in the way they had promised. So I know that was a very frustrating moment for John, but for all of us. We did the work, we had the evidence, yet no faculty line, right, for our program. When I took over in 2015, I felt like my role was to just kind of keep a good thing going. We were a good place, and worked on that programming that we're known for. But I think my spin on it was, how might we center the experiences, the voices of Latinas, one of the most marginalized populations in the US when we think about wages, education level, working conditions, that type of thing. So in 2016, I hosted the Latina Film Festival. We had panels and some great films. In 2018, we screened Dolores, the documentary. And it was through my interactions with the director, Peter Bratt, that he encouraged me to invite Dolores herself. He said she's very generous with her time. I'm sure she will respond. And she did, in fact, respond to my cold email, or her agent did. But, and that's how I got her to campus in 2019. Some of the sort of constraints or challenges, similar to what Francis has mentioned, budget constraints. We are known for putting on programming that costs us about $25,000 a year, but our operating budget, our allocated budget is less than half of that. So this means that much of our time, the director's time, is spent applying for internal grants, seeking financial co-sponsorships for events, to make the $25,000 worth of programming happen in any given year. That's a lot of time, right? It's a lot of time. On the plus side, this does lead to, collaborations and community on campus. We all look out for each other. But I just feel that shouldn't be the case, right? Heartier budget is needed. We are also always under the threat of merger. This came up. Do I need to speak up? Is that what you're saying?
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. I'm almost done. Okay. We're also always under the threat of merger, which was the case during my tenure. Combining with other small programs on campus, Asian American Studies, Native American Indigenous Studies. We've managed to resist that as the largest of the 3 programs and with the sort of hardiest identity on campus. The challenges of hiring, Francis noted, so I won't repeat that, but as a program, we don't serve as anyone's tenure home. So it's really hard to get faculty hires. We have to depend on a department identifying that as a need so that they collaborate with us on a hire. And then the last thing, I think sometimes this invisibility allows for a lot of autonomy on campus for us to do what we can do, but it's still frustrating, right? The invisibility is frustrating on the other fronts, the financial constraints, the lack of hires. But if there's a plus side, it's that, some autonomy. Yeah. Thank you. 10 minutes goes by fast.
And I'm really delighted to present or introduce our final panelist for this event, not our final contributor because we have many, Jose Cuello from Wayne State University.
Well, thank you. I'm really proud of you guys because, we thought about this at IUPLR like 20 or 30 years ago, but nobody wanted to take on the task because it was just too big. And at that time, we were thinking about all of the centers throughout the United States. So that was way too big. So we just said, okay, wait for somebody else to do it, and you've done it. So this is a key moment in our history. But I want to emphasize that, Latinidad it's so vast, it's so internally diverse that it's even hard for us to agree on what we want to do and who we are and where we want to go. And so I want to center it in my own personal biography a little bit because, most of you were probably born in the United States. I was born in Mexico. And my father came up during World War II as a bracero, and he worked on the railroads in Arizona. And then in 1955 actually before 1955, he came up to Chicago with a group of buddies and they got jobs, in Chicago. And in 55, he went back to Mexico, got my mom, myself, and my two brothers, and brought us up here to Chicago where I grew up. And they've had 4 more children here. So I'm the oldest of 7. But what happened to me was that I was taken from one cultural paradigm at age 7 and thrown into a new cultural paradigm, totally alien to me, and in which my identity as a Mexican didn't function anymore. It was non-functional. I didn't speak English. I didn't, the streets in Chicago were concrete. My parents did a lot to try to integrate us. So, for example, we went down to Maxwell Street, and they bought us Davy Crockett jackets and coonskin caps. And so I went into I finished second grade in Mexico, started third grade in the United States on the Catholic school without knowing. There was no bilingual, no nothing. You just learn it on the go. By fifth grade, I knew English and I was able to speak it. And then I had a nun who told me, do not sacrifice your Spanish. Do not forget your Spanish. Don't be ashamed of it, because at that time it was a shameful thing to be Mexican. I remember the first joke I heard about Mexican was, "Oh, your name is Jose. Okay, great. Do you know what happened? There was this immigrant named Jose who came to Chicago Sox Park, and wanted to get into the ball game, but all the seats were taken. The stadium was full. So they told Jose, well, the only seat available is up in the flagpole. So Jose climbed the flagpole, and then Jose was really gratified and happy that everybody in the stadium stood up and said, "Oh, say, can you see?" So I had to live with that experience, and I learned that how do you maintain different identities and keep them valid to yourself, where you're a Mexican to, we went back to Mexico every summer. My dad had 2 jobs for 29 years, 8-hour jobs that he was able to do in 4 years, 4 hours, and he was able to do them both. But he took us to Mexico every summer and for a month. And so I maintained contact with my relatives down there. But then I had friends up here. So I had this bi-cultural, bi-national identity, and I had to combine them and be, and then you learn that your identity is different for every single person you know on earth. So you're a different person to your mom than to your dad, than your siblings, etc. So I myself consider my specialist in multiple identities. So I went to the University of Illinois in Chicago, UIC, when it first started on campus right there. And in '69, I went there for the first full semester, graduated from there. I needed to learn something about my history as a Mexican because of the discrimination that I found. It wasn't always out there discrimination. It was just sort of subtle, like even now I still feel like I'm an immigrant. I'm 75 years old and I feel like I'm still an immigrant in America because this country belongs to white people. And so, that makes me upset, because I contributed more than some of the white people I know. But I was able to get a Latin American history education at UIC. And then I went to Berkeley. I was the beneficiary of the affirmative action program, the civil rights movement. And Berkeley was looking for people to induct into their history program. I applied. They called me very late in the summer, and so wow, I'm going to Berkeley. Okay, well, hey, Berkeley was a cold place for Latinos, man. And the Berkeley decided, okay, we're going to have 5 Latinos, and they're going to get an education with us, and that's it. And so I was the only one that survived. The 5, all the other ones fell out for a variety of reasons because all the professors treated us like standard students in which we don't need any help. In fact, you got to find your place yourself. But then I went to Marquette University when I got my PhD, and again, another cold place. The only reason I got hired at Marquette was that I specialized so much in different fields. So I knew Mexican history, Latin American history, US history, and Borderlands history. And Marquette was interested in Borderlands history because it's the Jesuit thing to do. So you want to teach the Jesuits are great figures in Borderlands. They converted everybody. And then after they fired me at Marquette for being insubordinate, I got hired at Wayne State, And they said, well, you're hired because you're specializing in Latin American history, and the history department wants a Latin Americanist, but you can also do Latino. And then the community, I got hired because the community was pressing Wayne State for years to hire someone with a PhD that could get tenure in the department of anywhere, and so they could have the status to address the administration with authority, because up to that, the center had been run by counselors and part-timers, and it was always being devastated. And so once I got there, it was like dust in the ground. It was completely collapsed. And I had to serve 2 masters. I had to prove to the history department that I was a legitimate scholar. I had to prove to the Latino community here that I was a legitimate Latino, that I did not need a roadmap to find the hood. And the beauty of the community is that it has not stopped maintaining watch over the center. Even now, I still am, even retired, I'm still responsible to the leaders of the Latino community. Like, what the hell are you doing now to make progress here? Why didn't you communicate with us during COVID? You know, we were waiting for you, and now we're holding you accountable, and you got to come in and tell us what you're doing. At the same time, you know, we have to please the administration that we're legitimate people, we're legitimate topic of study, we're diversifying the university. In short term, since I got here in '89, and then I could only last 12 years in that role. I've burned out. I can't believe that Jorge Chinea is going on 20 years. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. And he's still super active. And he's not only worked it, see, you have to work the administration inside, and then you have to work it from the outside. And so during my tenure of 12 years, I had to work both roles. I had to please the administration, but I had to go outside the community, and when there's a crisis, I had to anonymously tell the community what's going on. They called me in and say, okay, what's going on there? Why did they close down those Latino programs on the radio? And okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to sneak in the middle of the night, go over and talk to you, because if the administration finds out that I'm betraying them. And eventually what happened in 2003, 20 years ago, Jorge and I were pulled out of our offices by Wayne State Police on the false accusation that we had gender discriminated against an employee. And they took them 6 months to free us, to get us back to the office. And it turned out to be a false accusation. But they were trying to fire us both because we were speaking out for the Latino program. We went, one of the deans thought that, I can shut down Chicano Boricua Studies, and I'll get promoted from interim dean to full dean if I shut it down. And so he limited our charter proposal from 5 to 3 years. So we went to the academic senate, and they asked, Dr. Chinea, do you really want to reduce your charter from 5 to 3 years? Is that what you want? And we said, no, I want the 5 years. So the dean said, okay, you betrayed my decision, and I'm going to get rid of you. So they used that to remove us from our offices. But the community rose up and demanded that we be treated right. And they raised $5,000 in funds to pay for our lawyers. I had to pay another $5,000 out of my pocket, but hey, you know, I get well paid at Wayne State. But I want to focus on the unique nature of the center at Wayne State, because I do believe that is unique, because the community, all the community care about is, are you getting our students into the university, and are you graduating them? Okay, we're doing that. But how do you do that? You just can't bring them into the university, admit them, and not nurture them, and not provide a program for them. So we have a very complex student recruitment, retention, and graduation program. That's a whole ball of wax in itself. But then I realized, well, we can't have students here without the legitimacy that is provided by the research and teaching components. So Jorge and I have been teaching, we doubled up. We do both Latin American and Latino history. We do both. We had to do both because nobody else around to do it. And the other thing about there's 5 four active statements that we do. One is the recruitment and retention. Another one is the teaching and research. Another one is the community outreach, and another one, a major one, is advocacy within the university for Latino issues. We have been the longest center of diversity at Wayne State since I got there, and even before. Even the African American Studies doesn't do the kind of program we do. There's no diversity at Wayne. It's only diversity at Wayne. Yeah, diversity at Wayne has only come to realization in about the last 8 years. And we're now getting funded that we never got before. And a part of the message is that we are so dependent on decisions made by other people that we don't, that we have to, for so many years, we were threatened with cutoffs every 5 or 10 years. Oh, we have to cut everybody. Well, sure, you're going to cut a position from the history department and you're going to cut a whole program off. That doesn't work. So we said we're a legacy of the civil rights movement and we're still here. Luckily, we now have a president that's outgoing, but 2 provosts that have succeeded us and they're supporting us. And now we're looking for a transformational president that I hope will continue the kind of treatment that we've had in the last 8 years.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now, because we've been so good with time, we have time for Q&A, which I think that Billy had said he would monitor. Are you going to monitor us?
Yeah.
And
I actually have a question too.
oh,
if I may.
already?
I can jump in with a question.
Okay.
So one thing I wanted to share with people, I'll put it into the chat, is that the Latinx Research Center at University of California, Berkeley has just recently released a study that they talk about, or they title, the stagnation of Latino studies, or Latino studies stagnation. And I wish they really would have titled it instead, disinvestment in Latino studies, or under-resourcing of Latino studies. Because as many of you have pointed out, some of the things that they talk about as a national crisis really with respect to Latino studies as a field is, this is one of their findings, only 89 of the 2,600 plus four-year universities in the United States even have Latino studies programs, which is an astounding number, right? Most of these programs only have one or no. I love that listing 0 core tenure faculty member is a statistic that has to be reported. But like most of these programs, if they're programs or departments is a separate question, but people have already addressed the sort of difference between program and departmental status. Many of them are programs and they have one or no core tenure track faculty. So here's my question. Since many of you have also pointed to the fact that in kind of neoliberal times, the only way to get faculty tenure lines is to increase enrollment. And sometimes even if you increase enrollment, you still don't get tenure lines for people. I'm wondering if there is something politically that we can do just to begin to attack that very logic, right? Like insofar as the university presents you with an equation that says, you have to demonstrate enrollment in order for us to allocate funding for you to increase your departments. That logic needs to be questioned on some level because overall universities are profiting from the increased enrollment of Latino students. So you need to have a commitment to these programs. So I'm just wondering if you have strategies with respect to how to challenge that institutional logic. And secondly, I wanted to say just a couple words about DePaul. Many of you have talked about the fact that the programs exist at your various universities because student mobilization occurred. We've advertised this event actually today to undergraduates, and there's maybe 2 undergraduates and 1 graduate student present. So DePaul is a commuter campus. DePaul is a school that has first-generation students, many of whom have jobs that are full-time jobs. They think of themselves as college students after being employees somewhere, right? So I'm wondering how you get those enrollments and what kind of marketing you do in a context when first-generation college students are not necessarily drawn to our classes in the humanities. They're drawn to courses in business. They're drawn to courses in computers or computer science that they see as potentially lucrative. And sometimes our disciplines and fields, which would help orient them historically and culturally, right, are seen as a kind of peripheral thing or an extra thing that they don't necessarily have time for in their schedules. So, you know, I just wanted to add a little bit there, like what do you recommend in terms of marketing so that we can, and I guess I was really also trying to cite the kind of larger problem that even for us to have student mobilization, right, like the very conditions for student mobilization are in some ways disabled at a place like DePaul because students don't spend a lot of time on campus. They don't necessarily create connections with one another. It's very difficult for them to, you know, have classes with us because they're dispersed across campus and are often only here when they're not working. Does that make sense? So, you know, for me, that's a very bleak outlook to sort of think about if the only way that we can get any activity is through student mobilization, you wonder if that can even occur, right?
Does anybody want to respond to that?
Sorry for my rant.
Well, I can start really briefly. It's a big issue. And for me, the way that I've seen is I feel that our students and we as faculty need more connections now than ever. There's a lot of dissatisfaction, disinterest, disengagement, depression. So what I've been trying to do is I've created new courses in which we're in the community, with the community. It's almost going backwards, right? Rather than the community coming into institutions saying, you want to be part of the institution, it's the institution or taking advantage of what little place we have in the institution to try to have greater connections with 4-H, with the Iowa Human Rights Department, so that in fact, there are collaborations that start building engagement between our groups. And it's completely true that Latinos, Latinx are not only a growing population, but an incredibly vital population. And so how do we create spaces of learning and engagement that allow us, all of us, to understand that value on a human level? So I think it's really kind of going full circle. That's how I've been trying to engage it in the present in my own classes and through the programming that we keep doing with Latino Studies at Iowa State. But I would love to hear others.
I would second that only because Billy, my experience at UIC when I was at UIC was very similar. I came into this campus thinking, oh my God, there's so many Latino students here. And then I organized my first lecture with Felix Padilla, who came to campus, and like 5 people showed up, and it was like at 5 o'clock, right, on a Thursday or something. And I was like, oh my God, I was devastated, right? And then I realized, well, if they don't come here because they're working or they're with family, whatever, then we're going to go to their neighborhoods. And I started the Lectures in the Community series, which was amazing. It developed into an amazing programming for a couple years where we matched the speaker with the community. So we talked about Guatemalan labor in North Carolina, and we did that in the building across UIC where the labor unions are. We did, Mexican-American events at Rudy Lozano Library, Humboldt Park, the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, everywhere. We went San Agustin College when we did something with a Peruvian writer. So it was just amazing how important it was to go to the community instead of having them come to us. And I think that's what Lucia's also talking about, is the need for us to extend our presence. And my sense at DePaul is that you guys have your social justice values, which is very much part of the DePaul, DePaul institutional, right? Values as a Catholic university. So I would say take advantage of that and maybe create some kind of class that combines or combine with other units in the university where you could actually take the students, even if it's back to their communities one way or another, or to think about social justice outside of the classroom, But
yeah, if I can say something, I would say that here at Detroit, because the Latino community, and it's not the whole Latino community, it's only certain leaders. So when you talk about the community, you think, oh, there's a vast movement out there, but basically it's a few activists, 2 or 3 activists pushing us to do the right thing. And they have always been interested in the recruitment of Latino students from Southwest Detroit and the metropolitan area into Wayne State. So that has given us a base of operation in which, for example, our center has 2 counselors, advisors, and we have probably the lowest ratio of counselor advisor to students within the whole university. And so we're very effective that way. One counselor focuses on recruitment in the first 2 years, and the second counselor goes from college to career. And so we have that. But I think a lot of the problem is that the Americanization of all immigrants and their children makes it our students willing to go to the profession. We've succeeded in creating space for some Latino students to go into the mainstream, and they're so interested in the mainstream that they forget about Latino because they're not threatened anymore. But we do provide a cultural environment here that they love, and so that's a main focus for us, is to provide that cultural support, but then mainstream it as well.
If I can jump in, I've tried to get them early by participating in or teaching for the Group Scholars Program, which is a scholarship program in Indiana for Indiana residents for first-generation college goers, and they start their college careers the summer before the semester starts. So I teach a Latino studies class in the summer, and I just really try to captivate them there, saying, this will be an important part of your identity journey in some way, right? As it was for me when I went to college and took Chicano studies courses. And I do get a handful of students who decide to declare a minor through that. Again, it's a very small intervention. So getting them early before they get into those professional schools, really helps a lot. We've also started collaborating with Lillian Casillas from the Latino Cultural Center, developed a living learning community or thematic community in the dorm. And we're working to make it, I guess, officially a living learning community where we can require Latino studies courses. But the collaboration there is also bringing workshops or panels to the dorms, right, in that way, rather than to formal coursework. But Jose's right. I mean, they're moving into the professional schools, those mainstream professions early, and so they don't see the need anymore. So.
I'm sorry.
I think Lourdes wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, that study at UCLA there's going to be an article based on that report published in Latino Studies. So look out for that. And the other thing, I was just thinking that we have to get more creative about how we market our courses and the types of courses that we teach. If we keep doing the things that we've been doing for the last 50 years, it's not going to work. We have to think of new creative ways and market ourselves. I hate to use, corporate terms, but hey, we have to do it. One of the things we've been doing at DePaul is trying to combine what we do with some of the other colleges. So we just introduced a new major in Latino culture and communication. So to bridge together the folks who want to be journalists, work in the media, work, with community centers doing their media, to make sure that they have a solid foundation in Latino studies. So we're hoping that will bring more students to us. So I think we have to get more creative in what we do. We can't offer the same courses in humanities and social sciences and think that the students are going to come to us. The other thing is I feel like we limit ourselves if we're just trying to reach out to Latino students. And we need to think bigger than that and say, we're such an important part of the United States today, and will be an even more important part in the future. We need to communicate to everyone that they need to take Latino studies courses and major or minor in Latinos. I think we miss a huge part of the potential audience. We just think Latino. So I hope that we start thinking in larger terms and get more ambitious and more creative with what we do to bring students to our programs. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lourdes, I would like to follow up on that really quickly, because that is absolutely true. And at Iowa State, you know, when we advertise, market, and have students working together, it is not solely Latino. I really want collaboration and intersectionality. And we have just started a collaboration with criminal justice, which is a growing critical field of study and social action. And we have been one of the scholars who does work specifically on Latina violence against Latinas and their response to that, and the grouping of the social networks to help shift that is now part of what we're offering in the program. So it's absolutely, I just wanted to say yes, absolutely.
I wanted to say too that I think one of the interesting contradictions and ironies with the growth of the Latino student population in college, which is 20%, this data, I got it from that article that Lourdes is publishing in Latino Studies Journal. It's a small family here, but that it's the how can I say this? The trend towards universities becoming HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, right? Based on the percentage of students they have on campus. They are literally benefiting from that status, right, as HSIs, because they actually receive money from federal government once they reach 25% of their student body as Latino. And part of the problem is that that money doesn't come back to the Latino studies faculty or programs or curriculum. They can use that money in any way they want. And that is really problematic, because it's almost like the students are there to benefit the administration and to benefit the university, but then there's no reciprocity in giving back some of that money or reinvesting it, right, in things that are going to benefit Latino students, Latino faculty, research, and curriculum. And that is something that we need to start speaking out about and begin to say, you know, that is not right. If you're going to do an HSI, you need to invest in the Latino studies programs, the community of students and faculty in that campus. Otherwise, it's just very, very, to me, that's very, very problematic. So the students are there, obviously, in most universities. It's a matter of how do we try to recruit them and bring them into our classes. And I agree with Lourdes too, that there are different colleges, right? Applied sciences and applied disciplines that are not necessarily, you know, the liberal arts, but that we can actually make connections with those and try to create, you know, at least a couple courses. Things like environmental racism. There's just so many new areas that we could be looking into and developing new courses for our students that would actually make them much more relevant to the lives that they live in now, right? So.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Sylvia might have a comment.
Oh, I just was I wanted to point out Gina Garcia's work. She talks about how not all HSIs are Latinx producing institutions, meaning they don't invest those resources they're getting from federal government in serving Latinx students. So if you wanted to read more.
Yeah, Gina Garcia, is that her name?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think she's at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh.
So we have a hand here live, in person.
Yeah, in person. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Carolina Stamberg. I'm chair of the Department of Latin American Latino Studies. And my colleague, Lourdes Torres, is here too. We work together. My question is, DePaul is actually supposed to become an HSI institution. I wanted to mention that, and with Billy, we've been working, we've been strategizing, we've been meeting with different authorities at the school. But aside from that, we thought that something that we could emphasize is bilingual courses. And actually, we learned recently that one of the the programs, the first year program, is launching a pilot study to offer bilingual courses, Spanish and English courses. So I was wondering if you see the value on that as a recruitment strategy, or not necessarily as a recruitment strategy, but to value the presence of the Latinx community, to value the legacy, et cetera, et cetera.
Was that a question to Lourdes?
No, to anyone.
Okay.
Yeah, to anyone.
Does any of your universities have a kind of bilingual college or offer bilingual certificates in particular programs? Because what's being contemplated here is to offer bilingual versions of courses that students would take in liberal studies. So you might take a chemistry class in Spanish, or you might take a philosophy course entirely in Spanish. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pilot study, still in the works, and the idea is to, as Billy was saying, to offer any type of core course in Spanish.
We at IU, we don't have that, but we did just hire a faculty member in Spanish to teach Spanish for heritage speakers, which a lot of Latinx students on campus have been asking for. I also know that they have, at least when I was director, there was a desire for some of our Latino studies courses to be offered in Spanish, or at least almost in a Spanglish, right, format, like just a space where they could practice, they can make mistakes without shame, without, someone correcting them, but just a space where they could practice. But never been able to do that. But we have, like I said, hired this year a Spanish professor that offers that type of course. So not technically bilingual education per se, but there seems to be a desire for that on our campus.
And at Iowa State, we do have Spanish for heritage speakers, which counts for the Latino Studies minor. And I teach a course on Latinx memoirs that I teach. One year I teach it in Spanish, and another year I teach it in English. And this semester, it's a kind of pilot. I've been teaching a course that's so my students who need a Spanish credit counting for the minor will do all of their work in Spanish and look for the reading in Spanish, but the class is conducted in English because we have also students from women and gender studies, students from English. So it was like to get a larger class into the classroom, but to kind of figure out a way to work with the two languages. That's been, I think there's a lot of note-taking that I'll do at the end of the semester, and I have to sit down and think about how to make that work better for those students who need to improve or work on their Spanish in a class that's bilingual, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the innovation, that we have to keep reinventing things to appeal to our group and other groups. For example, we live in a multicultural, multi-language world now. Anybody who only knows English is deficient. And so there's going to be tons of people that are not Latino that want to come into that bilingual course to get that experience and education. So, I mean, we have to link Latino to anything that's universal. I mean, we are universal, aren't we? So let's make all kinds of linkages where people want to come to us.
But we also have to be careful that a lot of Latinx people, Latinos, do not speak Spanish. So
Oh yeah, no, exactly.
Really supportive and considerate and caring. I think that there's care at the center of where we are right now historically.
Picking up on that, I have another question. We have just a few minutes. I don't want to go over our time, but just any thoughts? Sylvia, I was really struck in your article. You had a lovely line where you said that one of the challenges is trying to strike a balance between providing academic content, but also providing some of the support services that students need. And I know that we have different configurations at our universities. Sometimes there are support centers for undergraduates that are providing, programming or support and counseling, but a lot of times faculty have to play that role as well, especially if your university doesn't have those resources, which can lead to burnout for faculty at the same time. So just any thoughts that people have about balancing academic content and then the ways in which we also have to kind of go beyond that to create support services for students?
Well, one tragic decision that we had to make at our center in Wayne State was that initially we were open to anyone who applied to our program, and we had a special permission from the university to include people who had very low GPAs but showed promise in high school, but then they required so much social work attention that we could not serve the students that were actually prepared. So eventually the hard decision was made that we could only accept persons who were qualified to come to college because we could not repair the damages that were done in the high schools. And so we're now succeeding on that, but it's just I just wanted to point that out as a dilemma, because we're trying to reach a desperate need is for the universities to reach into the high schools and even the grammar schools to create a pipeline, not only for Latinos, but for everybody. But we're living in a disastrous educational system right now. I'd blow the whole thing up and start over again.
I would have to, I know at Northwestern, we, when I was there, we had a couple Latina students who would tell us that they were depressed, that they were looking for counselors, for help.
Yeah.
And they had to go outside of campus because the campus didn't have any people of color in the psychology counseling center and the student counseling center. And so I sent an email to the student, the vice provost for student affairs, and I told her, you need to hire Latino or Latina for these students. And eventually they did get a woman, Rosemary Magaña, who was from Pilsen. And she came in, I don't know if she's still there, but it was an amazing, it made such a difference. They still have this Sana sessions that they do just to bring in, students to come and just talk, and healing sessions, and especially now after the pandemic and with the gun violence in this country, there's a lot of anxiety, right, among our students. And so this is a real issue. That's the kind of thing you may want to connect to the HSI application, that you tell your administrators, basically that, right? That kind, the money that will come in will have to be used also for that kind of hiring. It's really important that they address the needs of the students.
I think that line refers to what happened and has happened on our campus is when we have, so like, for example, during Trump's campaign, our building in which we're located was tagged with like spray painted on the sidewalk with "Build the Wall," things like that. So students come to us for comfort, right, support, and we're here for them for sure. I guess for me, a simple acknowledgement from administration that we do that work as well, along with the academic, would go a long way. Just a simple acknowledgement that we recognize you go beyond providing the academic content and you provide that service to students would go a long way.
I've advocated for extra pay for us.
Yeah.
We not only work 9 months a year, but also the summer is also, students seek help and we're constantly at that. So why don't we get double paid? I mean, we should get paid more. A 12-month contract would be good for all Latino faculty instead of a 9 month.
So we're just a couple minutes over time, but I wanted to thank everyone so much for their participation here today. Thank you so much for creating another amazing issue of Diálogo. We appreciate this historic intervention that you have all participated in, and we're very grateful to you. Y adelante con la lucha, Thank you very much.
And I hope we can use these texts to take to our administrators. Hopefully they'll read them because there's a lot of really valuable information. Latino X studies really do matter. We belong to the US imaginary in the broad sense. We're knowledge makers. there's knowledge and important social cultural producers. So I hope that we get the people who might make some shifts and changes to read these texts and hopefully other institutional memories are documented. I'm looking forward to reading more. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, volume. It's good to feel that you're not alone.
Say it again, Jose, sorry.
You know, thank you for the volume and this conference. It's good to feel that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you, thank you.
Definitely.